Get ready. You're listening to Give God 90 live.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
With everybody, we are live on Thursday night. Welcome to Give God 90. This is Jerry Mitchell, my wife Myra. We are still trying to figure out how to get everything going on Spreaker and on Facebook so that everything works and everything comes together, and hopefully we have that accomplished. We'll know in a few minutes. How's that sound? Hopefully we've got some folks who are going to be tuning in very shortly, and they will let us know if things are doing what they need to be doing, or if they're not. While we're getting ready for that, you might have to restart that. While we're getting ready for that, let's remind you that you can download the Oh, wow, it's working. You can download the Give God 90 app absolutely free. Somebody else has paid for it, so you don't have to. That way, what are you doing there? You're going to have to close it all the way. Double tap it. There you go. All right. While she's doing that to make sure we've got everything covered, we'll keep going here and attempt to make things right and get things going. Let me turn up that mic, and hopefully everything's good. All right. The other
wrong website.
The other thing I need to let you know about, let's see, I told you about the Give God 90 app. Something I didn't do last week for our Facebook audience, because they can see it, Spreaker, okay? For Facebook, okay, that's what you're looking for. If you go, and they probably are backwards, but that's all right. That's what you're looking for. Those are the books. Tradition to Truth, my first book, of course, dedicated mostly to what it says, Tradition to Truth, comparing what's in the Bible to modern church doctrine and tradition. And that's what we're going to look at tonight, too, because I had some questions you asked, the same question somebody else did. From a different standpoint, though. But we're going to look at that tonight. Second book, God's Universe, God's Rules, deals basically with biblical authority and making sure that the things we do, we're comparing what we do to what it says in the Bible and not comparing the Bible to what we do. Do you know the difference?
Go ahead.
Okay, when we compare the Bible to what we do, we're saying we are the authority and the Bible isn't. But when we compare what we do to the Bible, now we're putting the Bible in the authoritative place, and we're holding us up to biblical standards and not the Bible up to man's standards. Big difference there. You're going to have to change that, because I know this is live. The other thing that some of you might want to be aware of, Hope Family Fellowship is now actually, believe it or not, on the move.
They are.
They're going cross country. They spent some time with their youngest daughter in Texas. Now they're on their way up. Last I heard, they were in Utah. So they're headed up to the Pacific Northwest. If you had been joining them on Saturdays,
right,
at 2, they do a Facebook Live Saturdays at 2. That may continue once they get established where they're going. Hopefully it will. So as that does that, I'll let you know when they reestablish that and when they get going and do what they're doing. Other than that, if you just click on the notifications on your Facebook thing, and they will notify you whenever they go live. So you'll have that available to you. While you're doing that, I want to talk about something tonight, because I had a question about a week or so ago from a person in. I hope your volume's down. Okay. From a person who was a little distraught. They had experienced being threatened, and they said, how do I deal with this? Bible says this. What my pastor says this. What do you say? And you asked the same question last week about how do we deal with people in certain situations. And modern church doctrine always goes to Matthew 5:39. Now, Matthew 5:39, a lot of people are familiar with. Mm-hmm. You want to read Matthew 5:39?
But I tell you, do not resist an evildoer, but whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn to him also the other.
You know how long I could talk about this?
Weeks.
Probably. Okay, let's unpack some of this, but first, let's get some language problems out of the way. If you go back to the original Greek, or even if you go to Shem Tov's Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, which was translated by a man named George Howard, there's a copy sitting right on my bookshelf over there, by the way. You're going to find out that that's not what it says. If you go back, and it doesn't matter which you go back to, whether you use the Nestle-Aland Critical Greek Text, or whether you go back to what the King James came out of, which was the Textus Receptus manuscript. Textus Receptus simply means to receive text. We got it. That's what they translated King James out of. They all agree that that word resist is not there. It is not simply a mistranslation, it's miscontext. What it is you don't repay an evil person. So if an evil person does evil to you, you don't go back and do the same thing to them, right?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Now, that, of course, is absolutely consistent with what it says earlier in the Bible. To be specific, as I reach for my King James, in Deuteronomy 32:35, and I'm going to paraphrase this just a little bit. To me belongs vengeance and recompense. What the Almighty is saying here is, look, you've all heard this as vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, right? You've heard that all your life.
That's it.
That means we don't get to get revenge. God says, I get revenge on those who do you evil. He says, now get this. This is really cool. To me belongs vengeance and recompense. Their foot shall slide in due time. Now, it might not be as fast as we might want it to be, right?
Right.
Somebody slaps me on the face, I want to see lightning bolts strike them down. I'll be honest with you. I'm human, okay? But it says, in due time, for the day of their calamity is at hand, and the things that should come upon them will make haste. Now, it's quick in God's time. It might not be as fast as I want it. Because I expect God to do things just lightning fast, right? All the time. It doesn't always work like that. But the problem is, we have another verse we have to contend with. Actually, we have a couple of verses we have to contend with. And that's found in Matthew 18:15. Now, you want to just kind of flop over there to Matthew 18:15, and don't mind the paper rattling. It's Bible. It's okay. And go ahead, read 18:15.
Now if your brother sins against you, go and show him his fault while you're with him alone. If he listens to you, you have won your brother.
Now skip down to verse 22. I believe is where I want to go.
Yeshua said to him, no, not up to 7 times, I tell you, but up to 70 times 7.
Okay. He's saying you forgive them 70 times 7. Now, if somebody threatens you, are you going to forgive them 70 times 7 while you're waiting for lightning to strike them dead?
Probably not.
Probably not. There's a very subtle, well, actually, it's not so subtle difference in what we've been reading. One, Matthew 5:39 deals with evil. But Matthew 18 deals with sin. There's a difference, okay? And the difference is extremely, extremely important. Sin I'll do sin first. Sin in the Hebrew context, the word is chata. And the context for sin means that you are outside of that surrounding power. You're outside of what protects you from evil. You're outside. You have stepped outside. Now, a lot of times it is been considered as missing the mark, right? Mm-hmm. But that's not a really, really, really good definition of it. You are no longer contained in that protection of the Almighty. You have, he says if we hear his voice, if we obey his commands, he's going to hold us in his hand and we're going to be a special treasure. Mm-hmm. Okay? If sin is not being in his hands anymore.
Right.
You're not that special treasure anymore. You're somewhere else. A special treasure he's going to hold next to his heart, right? Mm-hmm. But when you sin, you're no longer there. So when somebody steps out of that and sins against you, okay, Matthew 18 says you go to them and you say, hey, you need to get back in the hand. You need to get back and being that special treasure. And if they listen to you, well, your problem's solved. Mm-hmm. And he goes on down in there and he says, you got to forgive them over and over and over again because you still got to talk them back into being that special treasure. And that's different than evil. That is so far different than evil, it's not even funny because evil, the Hebrew word for evil is Ra. It also happens to be the name of the Egyptian sun god, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Ra, if you go back to the Paleo-Hebrew, the understanding is that it is just the very beginning of knowledge. Have you ever heard the term, you know just enough to be dangerous? Mm-hmm. Sometimes I think I know just enough Hebrew to be dangerous. But it says, if you're just at that very, very beginning point, you don't know enough yet to make a good decision. So now we have to ask a different question. Well, what's this difference between sin and evil? Can certainly a sinful or an evil person can be sinful, right? Mm-hmm. A right. Good person can become sinful.
Right.
Can a sinful person be good?
Yes.
Yes. It's that simple. I mean, it's not a difficult concept to understand. You can. Do I really want to use that? Okay, let me not go that way. Let me go this way. You can be a good person, mm-hmm. but still steal a candy bar.
Right.
Doesn't mean you're not. It doesn't mean you're an evil person. It simply means you stole a candy bar. Mm-hmm. And if you happen to be the shop owner, you go to that person and you say, "You stole my candy bar. You need to pay for that." But that is not evil. What he's talking about in Matthew 5:39 is someone who comes to you with evil intent in their heart. That evil intent in their heart is completely different than something that might not be as drastic, or I don't want to say as drastic, might not be as easy to deal with as sin. When we think about evil, there's not a really good definition of evil in the Bible.
No.
There's a really good definition of sin, and it's found in 1 John 3:4. It says sin is a transgression of the law. Sin is a violation of the Torah, however you want to explain it. Sin is failing to obey the Creator's instructions.
That's right.
But evil is different. In fact, in Deuteronomy, I believe it's 30:15, and it says, as soon as I can find it, See, I have set before you this day life and good, and death and evil. Well, where did he set that in front of these folks? It begins in Deuteronomy verse 28, and I'm not going to read all through this. I promise I'm not going to read it all. But what they're doing is they have come down to Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, and the folks on these mountains are calling down the blessings and the curses, the good and the bad.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the good stuff you want, the bad stuff you don't, right?
Right.
And he says, if you will follow my instructions, you're going to have the good stuff and life. If you don't follow my instructions, you're going to have the bad stuff and evil.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so difficult to understand that it basically takes up two and a half chapters. There's no short answer for the definition of evil.
No.
You've got to compare it to, well, there's a lot of words you can compare it to. The Hebrew word mayod typically means very, but it can mean some other things as well. And so when you say tov mayod is very good, but there's also some things where it says love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mayod, all your very, which means everything you've got, all your goodness, everything there is in you. So when you look at good and evil, you've got to remember that good's kind of easy to see, but evil's extremely, extremely difficult to define. And just like every other Hebrew word, you don't think of it, as a noun. You don't think of it as something, because evil is always in action.
Mm-hmm.
It's always doing something. You can talk about evil person might describe someone, but it's their actions that make them that way. You can't. It's like being made in the image of God. It's not, we don't look like him. We're made to act like him.
Mm-hmm.
So same thing with evil. You don't just be evil. You have to do something to be evil.
Right.
So the response that Yeshua says, if you simply read it in most of the English translations, doesn't make any sense once you understand that basic concept, does it?
No.
And it says, actually, let me, if I can, look this up really quick. And it's Matthew 5:39, I believe, is what I said, right?
Yes.
So, and it should have been marked, but I didn't.
I'll read it. I got it.
Well, I was going to read it in King James, but go ahead.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Read yours again.
But I tell you, do not resist an evildoer, but whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him also the other.
Yeah. King James says the same thing. I say to you, don't resist not evil. Don't resist evil. What do you mean don't resist evil? You're supposed to just stand there and let somebody threaten you. You're supposed to stand there and let somebody beat on you. You're supposed to stand there and let somebody slaughter you. That is not what it's saying. Not at all. You don't repay evil with evil. You repay evil sometimes with good, right? Mm-hmm. But sometimes you repay evil with victory. And let me explain what that means, because this is going to surprise a lot of people. In the nation of Israel today, they use this very concept, this very idea of when something evil happens, you don't do evil back. In other words, you don't repay evil, you become victorious over evil. And the nation of Israel sometimes takes a huge beating from the rest of the world, like especially the United Nations,
especially now,
because what they do is they defeat evil. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that includes burning down the house of a terrorist, which comes directly out of Torah. They're told to. God says, when you find the bad stuff in a home, you burn the house down, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. That's where it comes from. That's the reason. You don't become this meek, mild, wimpy pacifist, you defeat evil with good. And sometimes that means what is good? Following God's instructions, right? You defeat evil. Sometimes that means
Burning
the house down. Sometimes that means defending your life any way you can. Now, the person who was threatened, thankfully, was on the phone, so it wasn't a direct confrontation. And I don't know what state they lived in. I actually got it through. It wasn't on Facebook. It must have been Messenger or something. Anyway, they contacted me, and I said, look, depending on where you're at, the first thing I would do is notify your local authorities. You whether it's a sheriff's office, town police, whatever it happens to be, you notify them that this happened. If you feel that strongly that this person means to do you harm, that's the first phone call you make. The next phone call you make should be to get an appointment with either an attorney, or depending on the legal system and where you live, it could be a local judge, it could be a justice of the peace, it could be some places actually have district attorneys that handle that kind of thing to give you guidance and tell you what to do. Sometimes that means you actually have to sign the warrant yourself, right? To have somebody arrested, to bring them to court, to say, you did this, and you need to pay for it, right?
Right.
It's not always fun. When you are defeating evil, you have to watch your steps. You have to understand what you're doing and where you're going. Sometimes it calls for immediate action, and sometimes it calls for a very dedicated, slow process of, getting all the facts in a row, making sure everything's right, taking little pieces at a time away from this evildoer until they cease to exist. They can no longer be effective with their evil. They can no longer effectively process evil against you.
Right.
In it's in Exodus 20 or 21, it says that if you catch a thief in the middle of the night while it's still dark, okay, and he's breaking into your house, and you either hit him over the head, you can shoot him with whatever you want to shoot him with. If you kill him, it's not murder. Because he is now forcing evil into your home in the dark, where you have very, very little opportunity to really, expose it and see what's going on. But what happens in the light is different. If it's light outside, or if there's light there, now you have to expose that evil in a different way. You have to become victorious a different way. And, when you go through Exodus 20 through 24 and you read that covenant, you read how and why that's done that way. Because now this person who's caught in the daylight, if they were stealing from you, they have to pay you back. If they can't pay you back, they are now sold into bondage until your debt is paid. Or their debt is paid to you, I should say. And you might say, well, if you caught them, they haven't stolen anything. But they have. They have stolen the peace out of your home. They have stolen the grace out of your home, and they have to pay that back. And that, by the way, is not slavery. That is indentured servitude. Man stealing is still wrong. It comes under something else. But sometimes it's that serious that you have to put this person somewhere where they can no longer harm you, and they have to pay you back. Not always fun, right?
Right.
So as we look at sin, the difference between sin and evil, we see that we deal with it different ways. And as we're dealing with these things, we've got to be aware, and we've got to be able to understand, was what just happened sin, or was what just happened evil? Sometimes you look at it and you say, well, it was just stupid.
It's a lot of times.
That's a lot of times. I don't, folks, I'll be honest with you, I don't do stupid well, and I just happen to look up and see we've got people watching. Oh, hi.
Hi, everybody.
But I don't do stupid well. I can deal with evil. That's easy. I can deal with sin. That's easy. But when somebody is just being let's just face it, sometimes people are just stupid. That just irritates me because now I've got a third choice to have to deal with, right? Mm-hmm. And I have to, where's that line come down? Is what they did sin or is what they did evil? Because sometimes that person might not even know.
Right.
But they may be on the verge, and sometimes they might, I don't know, think they're right for some strange reason when they're doing something that the Bible says isn't right. However, we know that we have to deal with it, we have to expose it, we have to overcome it. That's the general outline. I didn't want to do a series on this, but I can't explain this thoroughly unless I do. And that means going through Deuteronomy 28 for the most part. So next Thursday, you get a heads up on what we're going to talk about. Usually you don't because I want to see your reaction. Because when I see your reaction, I can tell how other people are going to react to what I say. But as I start through and we explain and examine what evil is, then we can determine the difference between what is evil and what is sin. Mm-hmm. Because there is a difference, and it's important. That, everything is there for a reason. Somebody wrote a book years ago that I read, and it said, the title of the book was Words Mean Things. And if you're not defining the words properly, you're not going to understand what they're talking about. And I just got a whiff of something really good.
Oh, yeah, I think
There's a restaurant right down the street, and the wind just shifted, and it's blowing this way, and that smells like filet mignon. So, as we look into, and I'm actually going to tackle the hard one first. I'm going to tackle evil because it's the hardest to understand. It's the hardest to explain. But once you understand what evil is and what it leads to, I don't want to say sin becomes easy because it really does. I'm good at it, right? People don't understand that sometimes, but Paul thought he was a good sinner, but I got him beat by a long shot. When you understand what evil is and you understand what sin is, then you can begin to say, okay, this person did this to me. How do I respond? And you can apply what the Bible says properly. And when you do that, when you start learning how to do that, then your life improves dramatically.
It does.
So, thank everyone for joining us this evening. Can't tell you how much we appreciate it.
Hi, Karen.
And we certainly just enjoy all the support we get from everyone. It's wonderful. Thanks again, everybody. And have a wonderful, wonderful week.
Good night.